So, I've been on like an Indiana Jones just hype train for the past month. I've been rewatching all the movies in order to prepare for the final chapter in the franchise that we're getting very soon. And Indiana Jones has just been one of my favorite film franchises since I was a kid. So I thought I'd make a video giving my thoughts on each film. I'm recording my thoughts on the four older movies before I go see the new one, and I thought that would be kind of fun. And also, I'm going to be mostly discussing my perception of each film based on my most recent viewing of it, instead of trying to summarize like my entire history with said film. That all makes sense? Cool, let's get started. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think it's fair to say that this is like the greatest adventure film ever made. And it should probably be one's introduction to Indiana Jones, who's just such a cool, interesting character. Like, the whole Golden Idol temple sequence is just perfect. You see who he is, how cool he is, all the traps and stuff he gets into, and the archaeology. And yeah, it's just perfect introduction to the film and the character. But then you move on to the main plot of the movie, which is about the lost Ark of the Covenant. And I think that's a really interesting MacGuffin or like artifact to look for. And also the like theme for the Ark, the music, might be my favorite like leitmotif in the entire franchise. Obviously, the rest of the music is great too, and all the movies. In case I don't mention, John Williams, his music just king. Moving on, Marion is a fantastic female character. Might even be as cool as like Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor. That's a stupid joke. I'm making fun of the people who only think the good female action stars are Girl from Alien and Girl from Terminator. And that modern movies suck. I'm making fun of those people, but whatever. Sala is fun too. He's a funny character. I like how it shifts once we get to like Cairo and stuff. It kind of shifts from the mystery of finding the Ark to like the action of keeping it from the Nazis. And Belloc is a great foil rival archaeologist. He's a good villain. The Nazis, they're sometimes played kind of lightly, but they still work as villains, and they're a natural fit for the antagonists because, well, they're bad people. They were a massive force of fascism whose just leaders had a lot of weird social ideas, but they work here because they had an obsession with like occult artifacts. That makes them really interesting as antagonists for this franchise. And also, I just like watching Nazis get beaten up. Moving on, the opening of the Ark sequence is really interesting because Indy and Marion, they're tied up and they got to keep their eyes closed. They can't affect anything. They're just like the viewers. So we watch the forces of God smite the truly evil. These movies are like largely just basic good versus evil stories, but I think they're pretty interesting to analyze like theologically. And then we get a great conclusion. We see like a happy ending for the interesting and likable protagonist. But the arc remains. It's taken to a mysterious warehouse, and the music again, I just get chills every time. But yeah, so this movie's the GOAT. Fantastic characters, action, story. It's just like one of my favorite movies. No complaints at all, and happy to have rewatched it. So next up is Temple of Doom. It had been like quite a while since I'd last seen it. Hadn't rewatched this one in a while, but it's great though. I was like very very pleasantly surprised with it. You got a very different opening sequence. There's like a little musical number. It's weird, but it's kind of fun. And then you get this fun dialogue between Indy and Lao Che, who's this like Shanghai gangster boss, with the artifact that he found for him. The plane sequence is pretty funny. Lao's chain, the gag it's his plane, and then the unrealistic drop with the raft. Like that's funny. It's not realistic, but it's just funny. So like Indy, Willie, and Short Round all get whisked into this adventure, and it's just a fun setup. So they go to the Indian village, and the Indian village needs help. It's technically an example of the white savior trope, but that doesn't really bother me much here. Like, I'm aware that it's the trope, but it's not like, I'm not going to get fussed about it. Lily, the love interest, I guess, she's really annoying, but she's supposed to be annoying, like basic media literacy. Short Round, though, he's like a really cool sidekick. Imagine not liking him, he's great. The dinner scene, like at the palace, that's not that great. Indy's trying to talk about the magic rocks, but we look at all this ridiculous food to psych out the Willie and Shorty and the kids in the audience. It doesn't really work. It's kind of racist to imply that this is what Indian cuisine is. But like, I don't know, maybe I heard this thing that like, is it the people at the palace serve the weird food to like prank the characters? I don't really know what to make of this scene. Like, you could view it as racist, or you could view it as it's just a prank. I don't really know. I don't like the scene that much, though. Afterwards, Andy and Willie have a scene with, like, chemistry or flirting or whatever, and I'm not, like, super interested in their relationship. Willie's not that cool of a character. But then they enter the temple, the ceiling crushing them in the trap room. That sequence is fantastic. What stuck out is the "We are going to die." That's like the most awesome delivery Harrison Ford's ever done. The creepy bugs, like everything is just so perfect there. And then we and the characters were again left to just purely witness the Tuggy cult sacrifice. And just like holy fuck, no words. I hope the new one has some fucked up shit in it. That's just amazing display of evil to watch. The Thuggy Kali death cult is obviously like, not how real world Hindu religion works. It's using elements of the mythology to tell another good versus evil story. And you can look at it, whatever. I'm not super bothered by it because it's just obviously not supposed to be saying that's how it works. We're using elements to, yeah. The Sankara stones, they're pretty whatever MacGuffins. I'm not super interested in them. But the battle at the slave mining area, that's just like insanely good action directing from Spielberg. And then we lead into the minecart sequence, that's so fun too. And then the water rushes out, it just perfectly sets up the climax and keeps the story and action moving. It's great. Final battle on the bridge is pretty decent. We get some more of those good versus evil themes with Shiva, Kali, the Hindu gods. The stones burn, so again, it's like the supernatural forces defeat the true evil. And then India is able to save one of the stones to return to the village. It's a pretty satisfying ending. Overall, it's just a really awesome movie, actually. Pleasantly surprised by it. Really enjoyed it. So Last Crusade, again, also, I would say this one's also not as tight, but hear me out. So Temple of Doom got pretty dark sometimes. I think George Lucas and Steven Spielberg kind of wanted to avoid that with this, so they made it a little bit more like Raiders. It's kind of like poetry, sort of. They rhyme. That's a stupid joke. But this movie has a lot more comedy, and I think for the most part it works. There's just a few like nitpicky moments to make it less than complete absolute perfection. Definitely so much to enjoy though. Great opening. I like how we don't realize at first that we're following young Indy. There's like the fake out with the other guy, the grave robber. But then we realize that seeing the scouting program in movies, I'm an Eagle Scout, so that just like activates my lizard brain. And then the train, it's like I think it's an appropriately silly idea. It's kind of goofy. The Indy got a bunch of his major character traits, like the whip and the scar and the fear of snakes, all in one day. It's just like a goofy, he's an action hero, sure, it doesn't bother me. And then we get a neat flash forward to adult Indy finally getting the Coronado Cross that he was looking for. And then back to the college. My one joke that I really don't like is when he's like, filled to the brim with his office hours. Everyone wants to talk to him, and he just like leaves through the window. It's like it works all right as a joke, but I don't like how it characterizes Indy as a bad professor. So that's like one example of a nitpicky joke that I'm actually going to mention. But everything else is not really worth mentioning. But the Holy Grail is a pretty decent MacGuffin. The movie's really more about Indy and his dad, though, and that's pretty interesting. Also, I think I always like the European setting with like the medieval ties. It's somewhat more interesting than like maybe Egypt or India. The investigation in the library and then into the catacombs, into the boat fight, and it reveals both the clues about the Grail and then the clues about Indy's dad. It's just a fantastic sequence. Like, it's when the movie really gets started. It's great. It sets up everything so well. The castle is neat. I like the castle. So is the escape from it. Then we get introduced to Henry Sr., and he's great. He's pretty fucking funny. She talks in her sleep. And Henry and Jr. are just such a great duo. There's like a slight theme of book smart versus street smart, but they're actually both generally pretty competent, so it's not like making fun of either idea. Just a great duo. There's some cool motorcycle action with them. I like the scene at the book burning at Berlin. Obviously not counting any book burning, but just a good scene because it adds interesting characterization for Elsa, one of the villains. So they get the diary, the Trouble in the Sky sequence with the blimp and then the plane and then the car and the plane and the tunnel. It's just so fun. And then the birds, like just that whole sequence is so fun. And then get to the desert. It's nice to see Marcus and Sala again because they're both fun characters. The tank sequence, pretty decent. And then finally we get to the Temple of the Grail sequence. Find the temple, all the trials in there. It's just, I think that's just a perfect culmination of the whole franchise's like good versus evil and then also religious themes. Because there's interesting trials to do. The kneel before God, know the word of God, and leap of faith, and then find the right Grail. There's interesting trials, and then Henry has been shot. So there's like stakes there. It's just perfect culmination of all that. The idea of there being a Grail Knight still alive protecting the Grail, that's kind of goofy, but like I don't know, the Donovan death when he drinks the false grill. That's cool, and the line "he chose poorly" just goes so incredibly hard, and then our hero is the one who chose wisely. That's so good. So overall, the movie isn't perfect. I find some stuff to nitpick in it. I didn't really mention too much, but it's not perfect. But like at the end of the movie, that final moment with the line "Indiana, let it go," that just really ties everything together, and it even got me to tear up a bit. So it really makes everything in the movie all worth it. So, and then the ride off into the sunset, it's a great ending. So this is just a fantastic movie. I might want to complain maybe, but I really can't complain at all. It's so good. So yeah. And then Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, fourth movie. So I don't know if I would want to rank these movies. The original trilogy each has kind of plenty to enjoy, and they're all kind of distinct from each other. So it's not really fair to compare them. But this fourth movie is definitely the weakest. I don't even dislike it really. It's just not as good for a few reasons. But getting into it, I think it's interesting for the opening sequence to be in the mysterious warehouse from the end of Raiders, and it's also interesting to see and hear about how Indy dealt with the Roswell alien. And that kind of sets up the whole idea. The whole first act of this movie is just such a great showcase of all the 50s culture, like aliens in the Southwest Desert and the fear of communism, nuclear weapon testing, stereotypical youth groups with the greasers and the jocks or whatever, and Mutt. There's a couple of licensed music songs that are kind of weird for an indie film. I like both songs. I think they both fit, but it's just you've got great score music, so I don't know if you need licensed music as well. But yeah, moving on. Mutt, I actually like Mutt. I know he's like the whole 2008 we're trying to make Shia LaBeouf happen, but I like him. He's a cool character. Fits well for the sidekick of the movie. And then the cemetery in Peru is a pretty neat, spooky set piece. And they find the crystal skull. It's a pretty decent MacGuffin. I like the idea how it's initially thought to be like a carving, but then they realize it's an actual being's physical skull. And then so its mental properties are kind of weirdly defined though. And the lady who's interested in the Russian lady, Spalko, is a pretty whatever villain. I don't really care. But it's nice to see Marion again. The sequence where they first meet and then immediately they get into the quicksand and Mutt has to like grab the snake and he's like, no, grab the rope. That's just such a fun sequence. Other characters, Oxley feels like somewhat of a wasted character opportunity because his mind is like all gone because of the skull's magic or whatever. I don't really know. He's not as interesting as he could be. And then Mac is more annoying than Lily. He's my least favorite character in any of these movies. He's just so annoying. Shut up. But the action sequence with the jungle vehicles, like the big tree cutter and the jeeps and stuff, the sword fighting, not necessarily the monkey swinging, but that whole sequence is mostly good. The ant scene where the guy gets eaten by ants, that's a little over the top though. There's a lot of CGI and practical effects are like almost always better. But then they get to the actual kingdom, the titular kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's called like Akator or something. It's like decently interesting of a setting. Lots of water going on. That's cool. But it takes elements of like ancient alien theory, and that kind of sucks. You can find a lot of good videos on why ancient alien theory is like problematic, but basically it often suggests that people of color cultures needed alien help to create artifacts or monuments, but it rarely suggests the same for white people cultures. So it's not great to buy into ancient alien theory. But I'm not trying to get into that whole thing. But in the movie, it just kind of makes the ending themes kind of more poorly defined than the original trilogy. Like it's decent stuff, decent ideas in theory, but it's just not very satisfying in the actual film. So yeah, but the actual ending, it's cute, the wedding and stuff. And then yeah, that's the movie. I still like it. It just definitely doesn't work as well as the movies in the trilogy. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the original four. I'm gonna go see Dial of Destiny, the new one, like right now, and then when I get back, I'll record my thoughts on that. Sound cool? All right, see you just then. Done. So I have now seen the newest film, The Dial of Destiny, and I've given myself just a chance to think about it for a little bit before I discuss it now. And I think how I want to discuss it is briefly without spoilers, and then more extensively with spoilers, because there's actually a few things you might want to avoid knowing before you see it. But anyway, so it is still an Indiana Jones movie, and I still liked it. Not as much as the 80s trilogy, but I think about as much as Crystal Skull, because it's a good movie, but not great. For the most part works, and I'd say it has like different flaws than something like Crystal Skull had, basically it makes a few different choices that I'm still kind of thinking about if they were good directions to take the story and character. I get why this movie is sort of controversial, I guess. Also, the very ending of this film felt quite rushed. It just kind of ends really abruptly. But that's my only huge nitpick. The movie still has a pretty fun adventure story and some good action, cool artifact, and a cool villain. So, good movie, I'd say. On to spoilers. So, leave if you haven't seen it yet, or if you care. Major spoiler: Indiana Jones punches Nazis. I know, crazy, right? But anyways, that's just a joke. I mean, it happens, but it's just not that big of a spoiler. But anyway, so onto the actual spoilers of the movie. I like the prologue sequence. It sets up the story pretty nicely with like a smaller, less important MacGuffin. It leads into the introduction to the main MacGuffin and the villain. It's also cool to see younger Indian action. The de-aging is mostly good. I mean, you're aware that Harrison Ford is 80 and he doesn't actually look like that anymore, but it mostly works. The lighting for the opening sequence did look a little bit dark, but that might have just been the theater that I was in. Um, I like that we still had the logo transition, even if it's Lucasfilm and not Paramount. But we were missing the setting title cards. Like we could have had like Germany 1944, kind of like how this year and location in the other movies. We get into the main movie, and it feels kind of slower at the start. That's just because Indy's very old, but I think the movie works with that idea all right. I was pretty disappointed to see the reveal that Mutt died. It's definitely a choice. The idea of it being from him enlisting in the Vietnam War and stuff, that's interesting. They get some good drama out of all those like repercussions. I do wish that this like spoiler wasn't. I kind of knew about this before I went in. I might have had more of an emotional reaction out of the idea of it if I didn't know this going in. So that's kind of what I was referring to. You don't want to know any spoilers. But on to the real main movie. Helena, the goddaughter, she is not very likable. Doesn't mean I condone making a million YouTube thumbnails with her face and a big text with the word woke before you've seen the movie, but that's a stupid joke. But she gets more likable over the course of the movie because her view about the artifact kind of evolves. But yeah, she's not super likable at the start. But the artifact is really interesting. It's the Antikythera mechanism, because that's a real thing. It's a real artifact. In this movie, they kind of play around with it. It can detect time fissures, and that's a grounded enough idea for an indie movie relic, because the artifact isn't supernatural itself, but it can detect supernatural things, and that works all right. It's pretty grounded enough. And I like the idea of the villain, Voller. He mastered the space race because he was one of the ex-Nazis who they got to work on the rockets, but now he's looking at to master time. That's why he wants the artifact. He's just a really good villain overall. Like, no complaints with him at all. Sala cameos like right before the action starts. He's a fun character, but I kind of would have liked to see him more maybe. Like, it's the same reason, if you look at the notes about Crystal Skull, they were going to have Henry Sr. cameo in Crystal Skull, but then they're like, let's not do that because then they're going to be disappointed when he doesn't feature in the actual movie. It's kind of that same logic. If it's a cameo, you want to see more of them, and I don't know. The Morocco sequence, the auction for the dial, that's just kind of more of Helena being not super likable. That one plot point with her ex just went nowhere. And the kid's sidekick is whatever. But the cart chase is pretty good action. And the musical score for all the action scenes is good. I didn't notice too many new like leitmotifs on this one viewing, but I might notice them on more like potential rewatches when I know this movie a little better. But effective use of an older leitmotif, the one for Marion's theme, that was used really well in this movie, I think. So John Williams, if this is like one of his last movies, he did a good job with that, and I'm happy. The diving sequence is great. I like Antonio Banderas' character. And the idea of the eels being like snakes, that's really neat. They get some good jokes with that. They find the new piece of the dial or the other artifact or whatever. The whole scene where they like translate it and figure out what it's saying, that's pretty cool. And they kind of misdirect the villains a little bit. But then they go to the cavern tomb of Archimedes, and that's a pretty good set piece, I think. I like the bugs and the puzzle solving. So good set piece. And then the final act, we literally just do time travel. It's kind of a choice. But this is off topic, but the Nazi costumes in the plane and the whole idea of adding like fantastical elements to World War II, it just reminds me of the whole like the first and best Captain America movie. Just the idea of like taking a real world event, World War II, and just adding something to make it spicier and tell a more interesting story. I don't know. I just thought of that. I don't know. But it's fun to see that scene where the villains kind of miscalculated when they go through time vortex and they realize it's not taking them where they want to go. But spending so much time in ancient Syracuse is a choice. It's cool that Indy actually gets to witness history. And he wants to stay. He feels like he has nothing to return to. And this probably could have been more dramatic than it was, I think. Again, I've only seen the movie once, so maybe on future viewings I'll connect with it more. But the last like big choice that I'm iffy about, Helena just knocks him out. It's definitely a choice. Maybe Indy should have more actively decided what he's going to do. But I don't know. And like with the whole time travel thing especially, it's really easy to think about like what this movie could have been, like what ideas might have worked better. And I have some ideas that I'm kind of thinking about, but I want to discuss the movie that we actually have and not think about what could have been, I think. So that's that. It's just a movie that's easy to like think about is something that I thought of better than what actually happened. I don't really want to do that. But the ending scene, it's really nice to see Marion even for a little bit. I really like that callback about like where it hurts. That's just such a great moment in Raiders, and now we get it here again, kind of. But then the movie just like ends right after that. It's really abrupt. It caught me off guard, and I really would have liked a conclusion that just felt more natural. But yeah, that's the movie. I'm still kind of thinking about it. My opinion is definitely going to evolve and keep changing as I sit on it for a while and think about it more and maybe watch it again. But I still really like the franchise. They're just super interesting movies. They give you a lot to think about with the characters and the artifacts. I guess the action too, and the good versus evil stuff definitely. Pretty fun action adventure, yeah. So I'm really glad that I got to like organize my thoughts in this video and stuff. I guess one last thought is just I will definitely continue to enjoy Indiana Jones. So thank you for watching my YouTube video.